This is Season 4, Episode 45 of In Touch with Terri, a podcast for aesthetics professionals. This episode is titled, Why Aesthetic Practices Convert Fewer Leads Than They Should.
Line is a call recording and automation platform. And so the secret sauce, if you will, is speech analytics AI. We've built a brain that analyzes the contents of a conversation or a call recording. And from that, it can extract many different things that are important that we'll talk about in our conversation. But, how many new leads practices are getting, how many they're converting, where people are coming from, all the data that a practice needs to thrive. And then also the platform automates the way that staff follow up with those leads. So you mentioned call tracking. There's lots of ways to record calls and count calls, but we are analyzing the content of those conversations, and that makes a big difference.
Welcome to In Touch with Terri, our power-packed podcast for the medical aesthetic industry that brings you expertise, authenticity, more importantly, solutions that have proven to increase efficiency, profitability, attract, convert, and retain more patients, and feature some of the top industry experts as guests. I am Terri Ross, former Fortune 500 executive, international speaker, founder and co-CEO of Apex Platform and Terri Ross Consulting. On today's episode, I am super jazzed to be joined by Chief Revenue Officer of Line, that is L-I-I-N-E, Charlie Nguyen, to discuss something. Again, you guys know that I'm super passionate about this, and he is equally, I don't think I've ever met a guy equally passionate about this too, but we're here today to discuss why aesthetic practices don't convert as many leads as they should. Charlie, hey, what's up?
What's up?
What up, my man? Thank you for being here with me. I am super excited to talk to you because we've been, connecting these past couple of months, and I know there is. So before we get into the nitty gritty of it, I want to talk a little bit about Charlie. But I also want the listeners and our tribe here to know what Line is, because there's a ton of call tracking. I don't even want to give it that name. There's a lot of website companies that offer that, a lot of people that do it. So tell us, what is Line?
Line is a call recording and automation platform. And so the secret sauce, if you will, is speech analytics AI. We've built a brain that analyzes the contents of a conversation or a call recording. And from that, it can extract many different things that are important that we'll talk about in our conversation. But, how many new leads practices are getting, how many they're converting, where people are coming from, all the data that a practice needs to thrive. And then also the platform automates the way that staff follow up with those leads. So you mentioned call tracking. There's lots of ways to record calls and, count calls, but we are analyzing the content of those conversations, and that makes a big difference.
And so you guys know that if we just kind of even go back to the basics, and you've heard me say it so many times. I just, in fact, had lunch with the big PR firm in Beverly Hills, and we were talking about practices saying, hey, I want PR. And it goes back to, the why do you want PR, right? You think you're going to just get a bunch of people in the door. And I want a new piece of equipment. And again, I want this new marketing tactic, and I want new phone calls coming in. But we have to really take a good, hard, honest look at the internal, workings of our practice. And we're going to get into that today. So Charlie, tell us a little bit about you. You got a great background. I'd love the audience to learn a little bit more about you.
Sure. So my background's in sales. When I was in college, I had this crazy summer job where I sold educational books and software door to door. So I went out to the Midwest my first summer doing that. I actually knocked on doors to find a place to live for the summer. So I fell in love with the whole psychology behind how people make decisions and really a sales process, if you will. And then from there, my first job out of school was recruiting people to do that. So I built a couple of organizations doing that. I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur one day, got into a couple of sales jobs in various industries. And then I did consulting for about 3.5, 4 years. And the last project I did, I noticed this really unique challenge that specialty healthcare practice groups had, where sort of the bridge between the super valuable new patient leads that were coming in and actually scheduling those leads for an initial appointment or consultation was really lacking. there's lots of sales enablement or CRM type software out there that helps other companies or companies in other industries to be able to convert leads to the next step. But there's sort of unique challenges in a practice that make those not really a good fit. And so that's where the idea came from. I had a project where we were manually listening to all of the calls coming into a practice group, keeping track of everything, doing some coaching and automating some follow-up, and the results were amazing. So a guy I knew from college who's a lot smarter than me, that's the first valuable lesson I learned, is surround yourself with people that are smarter than you. He and I got together in, July of 2016 and decided to start a company. And so fast forward to now, we've got hundreds of practice groups across the country using the platform, and we're not looking back.
And you guys are in not just the aesthetic space, you're in different verticals, correct?
Yeah. So there's 4 main that we focus on right now. Aesthetics is our predominant one that we have the most practices in currently. Also oral surgery, ophthalmology, especially LASIK or refractive surgical groups. And then orthopedics is one that's been really interesting to get into as well. There's a couple of very large groups here in North Carolina where I live that we've had the chance to work with, and we're expanding in there as well.
I love it. So I just want to go back to kind of when you explained the difference about what Line is versus some of the other opportunities or, things that people might use. Did you say that you actually have your own AI, like you've built this system, if you will, that can analyze the quality of the call?
Yeah. So the quality of the call is a big part of it. And the short answer is yes. We've built our own proprietary AI that is using natural language processing to understand, again, the contents of the conversation. And so the real difference with us is we realized sort of being that bridge between leads and appointments, we're in a position or sort of have a perspective where we can capture lots of data. So quality of how a call is handled is definitely one of those data points, but reasons people aren't booking, whether or not calls are even answered, whether or not web leads are followed up with. And the most important thing is our system doesn't need any manual data entry from staff to be able to function. So all the other sort of, I guess you could call them competitive solutions out there on some level require self-reporting. So somebody to go in and log a task that they, did, or tag a certain call a certain way. That is not the case with Line. All of those things are automated with the AI, as you mentioned.
And you guys, my tribe, love you so much. I you know that I'm always super authentic. I keep it real. I only want to work with and partner with the best of the best in the industry. And candidly, when I did a demo myself of Line and I saw their data and their AI, I mean, it pretty much knocked my socks off. And I knew with like every being that I do is that one thing that we teach and what we offer in Apex platform, it also has to have this data and this support and the analytics to back it up. And there are hundreds of practices we work with. And truly, when we're all looking at our practices or our team and the ones that take the time to invest in their team, that's one of the first questions I ask. Do you have call tracking? A lot of the time it's no. If it is yes, I say, how often do you listen to the calls? And then how do you coach to be better? And then that shit doesn't happen. So I mean, with everything I have, again, I hope every episode, every podcast that we do, that you guys love the delivery and love the content. And so I want to get down to the nitty gritty about why you really need to take a good hard look and evaluate your practice. Ask yourselves wholeheartedly, like you chose to be an entrepreneur, a doctor, a provider, you chose to have a business, right? But you also have to equally choose to work in it and make it the best it can possibly be. And this is the one area that you have such a huge opportunity with the analytics from Line to be able to really do. And I just took some notes myself, right? Not just look at the quality of the call, but like collecting the data about how they're answering the call, how efficient they are, the timeliness of it. I mean, so many things. And this is the only chance that you have an opportunity to say, I'm either going to coach this girl or guy, right? In or out, or they're just not cutting it, or I've lost this much business, and then you can make a change. So let's just get down into it. What are some of the common reasons why new leads don't schedule the initial consultation?
Yeah, one thing I want to note as well, that's interesting, that when we're building the AI, we started by personally analyzing all the calls. So the stuff I'm going to answer, the answers to your questions are based on the findings of our platform, which we're closing in on like 1 million some odd calls, new patient calls we've analyzed. I personally have listened to and analyzed over 10,000 hours of calls.
God love you.
And I remember I was sitting early on after my partner Brad and I started the company. I was sitting on the porch on a Sunday. I would do a lot of the, listening to calls on Sundays. And my dad was over watching football, and he comes outside. I've been out there for 6 hours, and he was like, "Are you sure this is scalable?" So I mentioned that because there's just so many examples that I've personally heard to understand what's happening in these conversations. But statistically, in aesthetics, I'm going to focus on that in the answer. The most common reasons the new leads are not scheduling that initial consult, by far, not even close. The number one reason is what we call caller procrastination, meaning someone calls in either asking possibly to schedule or typically asking questions like, what does this cost? How long has the doctor, the surgeon been practicing? Can you give me some more information about the actual procedure or the treatment? Things like that, because especially in a cash pay space, these patients are as much consumers as they are patients. So they have the same mindset as anybody else who might spend their own money on anything. They're wondering about those questions that I mentioned. So what usually happens is the person handling that call will begin the conversation by dealing with that question immediately. So the call becomes about those questions, the answers to those questions. And either that conversation can be super short because the questions have been answered, or super long because it turns into like almost a consult by phone. So caller procrastination means the call really isn't focused on scheduling, and it ends with procrastinating. Oh, I'll give you a call back later, or something to that effect. So by far, the most common reason is that. And then following that is what we refer to as left message or answering service, meaning whoever handled the call didn't try to schedule the patient. They took a message for somebody else. And so that happens because there's a huge misconception where practices think that the expert or the person that has all of the answers to questions should really be the one that has that initial phone call with the patient. But really, the point of that initial phone call isn't to answer all those questions. It's to help them schedule an appointment. And so we find a lot of times there's phone tag, and, when you're taking messages for somebody who's interested enough to call you, you're forgetting the fact that they have, the internet at their disposal. So they're very likely to go online and look around while they're waiting for somebody to call back. So caller procrastination and left message / answering service are the top two.
I love it. And I'm going to add to it. I don't know that I've listened to 10,000 calls. And I hope if you were doing that, you had like a great bottle of wine or whatever you were doing.
Right.
Or two, maybe. Because I've also listened to, I don't know about 10,000, but, in addition to what you're saying, because I would totally agree, is that, and I've spoken at every aesthetic conference this year, and we do this thing called like call my practice in the audience, and somebody will volunteer. We call the practice. And so I think to your point, and what we teach in our sales course to alleviate and get around that, because people will say, Terri, do you have a script? And I'm like, look, you know how to read. I don't need to give you a script. I need you to innately like understand and believe and know how to do it. Right. And know that we're there not just to answer the question, but I need you to qualify me, right? Ask who you're speaking to, right? Get information, be like a friend, and really get down to the emotional root of that problem to be able to schedule that appointment. Otherwise, we could just be scheduling, and then you're not even a quality patient, and then I'm wasting time.
Sure.
But it's funny. I always use this analogy that we called this practice, and, we just said, hey, hi, this is Terri. Do you offer Ulthera? And the person was literally like, no, we don't. Click buy. Okay. But the practice had like Thermage and other skin tightening things. So it's really critical. We teach candidly. It's never about the thing. It's not about the tangible thing I'm asking about, to your point. It's about the practice also knowing oh, this person's calling about skin tightening, right? Just to say, oh, Charlie, I'm so sorry, right? Can I, ask how you were referred? And, oh, you're looking to schedule skin tightening and kind of get into that route. Would you agree with that too?
Totally agree. We're going to talk about pricing later, but the psychology is the same. Just because people ask a question doesn't mean that that's what they are really caring about. Mm-hmm. Someone has a need or a concern, and that's the reason that they reached out. And what you're saying is right on the money, right? Just because you don't have a certain brand of a way to treat their concern doesn't mean that you can't do that. So body contouring is when we hear that a lot. People call in and ask, do you have whatever type of body contouring? Mm-hmm. And they just say no, but they have another type. And those are the ones like when the groups who work with the owner or doctor hears those calls, that's when we have to calm them down because they get pretty upset.
Absolutely. But again, let's go back because I'm going to beat a dead horse and I'm going to keep saying it, that we just have to really pay attention that the training, and we say it, none of us could go to any other job in any other Fortune 500 company without training. And so while these are medical practices, we kind of just look at this as an oversight. And I hope so much that, we can go into 2022 and really just say, I don't want to be mediocre, right? I'm really going to invest in the time in place with my team. Okay. Second question. In your opinion, after reviewing all these analytics that you have, which most people don't have that, and then listening to these calls, what % of the time do you feel that the calls are good? And what % do you feel that they are not good?
Yeah, not as good.
Or shitty or whatever we want to say.
Let me answer that in 1 second. I thought about one other aspect of the first question, which is a pretty eye-opening statistic. On average, 14% of all new lead aesthetics calls are not answered during business hours.
Wow.
14%. And so one of the things that we really believe in is low-hanging fruit, simplifying things that you can adjust, that you can control, that will have an impact. And answering the phone is one of those. So it's very common that we turn on our system, our platform, and somebody's got 25, 30, 40% of their new lead calls not being answered by anybody. And those patients that are new typically aren't leaving a message. Again, they have the internet at their disposal. They're going to go Google another place and move on. So that's kind of the silent killer, because people don't have data on that, right? They don't hear anything because it just happens and nobody knew about it. So that's one I forgot to bring up. Your question there, in terms of analyzing calls and what percentage is good versus shitty. I would say it's hard to say a true percentage, just because, in analyzing all those calls, we know what the top performing practices and teams do consistently, and nobody does that until very few. So I would say like less than 10% of any practice I've heard, did I hear someone, I'm like, man, they nailed like sort of the major components that I believe are necessary. What I will say is most practices are good at least mentioning that there is a consultation. Some aren't, but the majority of practices will at least mention, hey, we have you come in for a consultation, which is great, because if you don't mention that at all, people don't know. And sometimes people ask a question and you say, well, we have a consult. Oh my gosh, can I schedule one of those? So it's really good to mention that. But what those groups aren't doing, who aren't performing as well, is they're not getting control of the call at the very beginning. And then after they explain what the consult process is, they're not being assumptive about scheduling. And you mentioned, qualifying people and digging in, which is very important. But once you've done that, you've established this is the kind of person that we should have come into our practice. It's really important to be assumptive as you transition to scheduling them. So going back to my summary, or to summarize my long-winded answer to your question, I'd say like less than 10% of calls I've ever heard with practices that we hadn't worked with are handled great. And then the majority of them are sort of mediocre because they do mention the consult process, but they don't do the other things that I talked about.
I love that. And I want to tap into, before we move on to the next question, the reason you and I even connected, right? And I love it because you have this amazing, line, right? Ability to offer this data and analytics in this tool. And then we wanted to partner together because we can be the solution to that, right? You're almost like identifying, right? Diagnosing what that is and saying, hey, over here, we're not consultants, but if you want to elevate this, right?
Totally.
So what type of experience, Charlie, do you think that one needs to excel at that front desk role to really be able to convert these callers into an appointment?
Great question. This goes back to the misconception I referenced earlier, and the reason that so much of the reasons that people aren't booking is that left message concept. People think that to handle initial patient phone calls, you have to be a complete expert on exactly what that person's calling about. You definitely have to know some basic information about the services and treatments offered in your practice, but you don't need to be able to answer every single question that a new patient has. So I think when people are looking for new staff members to come in and handle those calls, they're trying to look for too much experience, like maybe in the space. I'm not saying that it's bad to have experience in the same space, but what's more important is if somebody's coachable, right? If you're going to tell them that they need to do something a certain way, are they likely to do that? Because again, this is an appointment scheduling conversation. It is not that challenging. I'm not saying it's easy, but it's not complicated. And so if you have someone who is coachable, of course, has some enthusiasm, I really think that they could be excellent at handling new patient calls. And one reason I say that is it's very common that we'll get started with a practice and the least experienced person has the highest conversion rate. And it's because they're the ones that are focused on scheduling appointments because they don't really know what else to be focused on. Whereas the other people who have all this information in their head allow the call to get sidetracked, don't get control over it, and it turns into caller procrastination. So another way of thinking about this is the experience that most people are looking for is counterintuitively counterproductive to scheduling appointments. So coachability and enthusiasm are the two things that are the most important.
Okay, I love that. So I'm going to be a little devil's advocate here. Let's just go at it for
Go ahead.
I agree 100%. People have to be coachable. Okay. But then there's so many things that I've seen as a consultant. And what sometimes can happen is if people have that mentality that I'm going to hire, this cute little person with this bubbly personality because she can book an appointment. Okay. Right. Doesn't take rocket science to book an appointment. But if that's all they think the job is, that's a bad mistake. Because it's not just to book the appointment, because then I'm in practices often where I see they're like, hey, my books are filled. Half the practices don't charge a consultation. Now they're seeing free consults. And then the people came in and they weren't even a qualified candidate to come in. Now we have way bigger issues. So I think it's exactly what you said. It's coachability for sure. But it is really, to me, making sure that people at the front desk, because look, they have to do many things, multitasking, many different phones, check in, check out, try to talk to them about other procedures, making sure they're pre-booking. There's so many things, but more importantly, they have to fundamentally understand, and we teach these 12 service categories in the Apex platform, what the practice offers, right? Their unique value proposition. I mean, the one thing we always hear, well, hey, the Dr. Smith down the street is cheaper. And then they're tripping. They're tripping over themselves because they don't even know what to say. And I always say, if I lined up all your staff and I said, why would I come to you? Would they all say the same thing? And they can't. It's always different. So I think it's a fine line between your response and mine and kind of a mixture of both so that the owner really puts a lot of credence like on this particular job. Because I think it's often underpaid and undervalued and probably the most critical, because it's the first human touch point that any person has with that practice. Yeah.
This is the mismatch or the unique disadvantage for lead management in these practices. You nailed it, right? It's never going to change because of the nature of this position and just the talent pool that you're going to be looking at to hire people. any other industry, if you get inbound leads that are worth thousands of dollars, I can promise you that those people are going to be trained, monitored, incentivized. There's going to be tons of technology that's telling you what's going on. I mean, that is like super important part of business, and everybody in a sort of regular company, if you will, would agree. What I would say, and I appreciate your response to that, Terry, is we talked about this kind of in our prep, the order of operations. And so a lot of practices I see are trying to do multiplication and division or even calculus, and they're not worried about addition, subtraction. And so you definitely, I'm not advocating that you want to fill the schedule with non-quality patients. Certainly not. But you mentioned something interesting about consult fees. I think there's tools that you can use downstream that will allow your front staff to be more focused on simple tasks of trying to convert people to the next step, and then sort of safeguards that keep the wrong types of patients out of your consultation room. I'm not saying that you don't want to try to help people to be a little bit more consultative on the phone. I think that's a fine way to help somebody grow. But in terms of the attributes that I'm looking for when I'm trying to hire a new front desk person, I like to keep it simple and then create a structure and an environment where they can sort of dominate in that space that I create for them, and stay focused on those simple things of, ultimately your job is to schedule appointments. Now, of course, we want them to be quality, but I might take that as sort of phase 2, and I would build into my process things that help them. I also would say I love the example you gave of 12 people standing in a row, and you're like, why would somebody come here and instead of doctoring? I think you would agree is on the practice, right? Is on the management team and the ownership to make sure that their vision and how they think about the value proposition of their practice has been communicated to the staff. And so that's a really interesting example that is very true. I think a lot of practices don't have a consistent message.
For sure. And I think, God, when I'm in my deepest train of thought is like always when I'm thinking about all these practices that I've been in. And, I was talking to this surgeon, the other day who's phenomenal pedigree, right? Going into a new practice and hungry, right? Hungry on learning the infrastructure and learning. And he's done like every single thing in Apex. But I just want to hone in on that because let's be honest. And I say this when I speak on stage, there is no MBA school of aesthetics. Nobody goes anywhere to learn how to do it. So
That's right.
You want leaders teaching leaders, but with all due respect, they're not leaders. Like if they don't even know what to do. They know how to take care of patients and do proper quality patient care, but they don't even know how to coach their staff. And I always use analogies. I don't know if you have kids. I have an 8-year-old girl, and I've said it before. Like I don't know how to do Taekwondo. I mean, so I get her an expert. And I think that these practices try so hard or think they can just do it on their own. And while I applaud all that, I do often hear all the time, we're super busy. But again, busy doesn't mean you're making money. You could be making way more money. And so I really want to impress upon that. You might think you have a great team, but could they be better? And it always is going to come down from really seeking out expertise so that every department, the front desk, the providers, whatever it is that you're doing in the practice, and understand the best practices to be able to capitalize and maximize and understand your revenue per hour and your capacity other than just phone things, because it all plays into each other. Okay, next question, which this will be a hot topic.
Wait. I want to respond to that because I love it. I couldn't agree with it more. And I'm reading this really cool book right now called Atomic Habits by James Clear. Amazing. If you haven't read it, you got to read it. And they're part of the concept is just getting 1% better every day, which is something that's been said before. But the reason aesthetics is so exciting is what's the value of one patient lead? Non-surgical, first visit, not even lifetime, $1,200? What about surgical? $7,500? What about lifetime value? Tons. So one of the things I think surgeons struggle with is like they're already doing pretty well compared to like most other people. But you need to start thinking about, what if we got one patient better every week? What about one a day? Like how much would that actually change the business? And the answer in many cases is hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars, which is insane with the leads that you're already getting now. And so that mentality and seeking out experts is a part of that mentality, because you recognize that you don't know how to do something. And so you work with Terri Ross because she knows how to do X, Y, and Z. Like, that is taking responsibility of, or ownership, as I mentioned earlier, of just that messaging example. So I wanted to comment because I agreed with you.
No, thank you so much. Well, listen, thank you for the whole atomic habits. I'm going to go get it, and everybody else should too. But thank you for not even just concurring, because I love having dialogue where we have different opinions, but that you believe in the same thing, because truly the ROI is kind of ridiculous, right? What you just said, one a day, one a week. I mean, a couple a day, just because of becoming an expertise in your job, like, so that you're a higher contributor to the organization, is freaking huge. It's ridiculous. So I hope you guys can take a pause on these last couple of minutes here and really just sit with yourself on that for a second and just do the what if I did, because I know that we hear often the people that have taken the time, invested, whether it was in our private consulting or Apex platform or getting Line. And I know we've just sent a bunch of people to you, because I'm like, you can't do one without the other. I can't even help you if I can't go back to look at the data to coach your team. No, for real. I mean, but it all kind of, we're all like one big kumbaya, right? And the people that have done the work and like want to perfect in it, I mean, they've had exponential growth. So this isn't us like bullshitting or making it up. It's just, it is the difference of you taking your practice from like, here to, where it can possibly be. So I love this question. And I know I'm very passionate about the way I respond to it, but I'd love to hear what yours is. And we know that pricing is one of the biggest questions that everybody gets asked.
Oh my God, pricing.
Okay, how much do you charge for a boob job, right? I mean, really, it comes up. And so how do you think people should address the pricing question?
Okay, I will answer your question in a second specifically, but first, it's important to remember that it's just a question. It is just a question, like any other question is a question. Someone's asking you a question, and you have a choice as to the way that you respond to just a question. Mm-hmm. And so the top performing practices, teams, individuals in the country get control of the call at the beginning. The way they do that is they get any question, pricing, whatever, and they say, I'd be happy to help you with that. Have you been here before? And so they start asking the caller questions, and now they're in control, right? Some people are going to be more difficult. That's fine. But if you do that over and over and over and over and over again, you're going to be more effective. The other thing about pricing is when people hear a caller asking a pricing question, they allow themselves to trick themselves into, oh my gosh, this is just another price shopper. Oh man, I bet they're going to call 10 practices and look for the cheapest one. They probably have a spreadsheet where they're going to analyze, like, all right, I'm going to look in a 10-mile radius around my house, and then I'm going to do an analysis of who has the cheapest breast augmentation. And then I guess I'm going to go. I mean, that's just not what's happening, right? Again, patients are consumers at this point in the journey, thinking rationally about the money that they may or may not spend. So guess what the most rational question you'd ever ask yourself is if you might spend money? I wonder how much this costs. So that's why it's the most common, not because people are like looking for the cheapest. That is a super important thing to remember, because when you hear the pricing question, you trick yourself into thinking otherwise. Then it is a self-fulfilling prophecy and you just don't handle the call as well and you don't do well. Okay. So in terms of how to answer it, getting control of the conversation, focusing it on the consult, what I tell people to do and what I've heard, probably more importantly, a more important way for me to say it, what I've heard effective people do is explain that we have a consultation. What they're asking about, of course, is customizable. And so part of the consultation is going to go through pricing. Everybody's heard that before. Do that and then continue moving on to the next step. A percentage of people are going to be fine with that and follow your lead. Another percentage of people are going to ask the question again. And so in my opinion, if someone asks for some information specifically, in this case, pricing, more than one time, I I personally think that giving them some type of information, even if it's a massive range, is important. Because if I asked somebody something multiple times and they didn't tell me anything, I can see how I'd be like, okay, why am I not getting some information? So this is controversial because some people go, oh my God, don't do that, because then they might show up and think it's only going to be 7,500, but it's going to be whatever. I just think you're going to lose some people on the phone because they feel like you might be hiding something. So that's what I've heard top people do. And I'm interested to hear what you think, Terri.
Well, I want to comment on one of the things you said, because I've never heard it sort of positioned that way. But I guess you said that when somebody asks about what something costs, that it's just a question. So I love that you've sort of dumbed that down. It's true. It's just a question. You and I are friends. We're having a conversation. You're having a conversation with your family, right? It's a question. What do? You don't just, I mean, I think it's a mistake to always just answer somebody's question versus just taking a step back. I always kind of teach you want to ask like 5 questions in a row before you say anything, because your responses give me the narrative to figure it out. And then you've probably already answered my questions or alleviated any objections, number one. But I love what you said that, of course, if I want to go buy the Christian Louboutin shoes, I'm going to be like, well, how much, like, I wonder how much they cost, right? I know what they cost, by the way, but I probably have way too many pairs upstairs. But when you position it that way, that's not just about the person looking for the cheapest thing. Now, I'm going to give away the super free tip that I always say, because if people are pushing about the price, and of course I do think you explain the consultation, the value proposition, you're to build this comprehensive treatment plan, right? So that the range could vary. I definitely think you give a range. But if people are still pushing, well, Charlie, I just want to know what it costs. I mean, I just want to know what it costs. I think the caller has to be listening innately, right? So 80% of any consult or any phone skill is 80% listening. We all tend to just talk too much. But if they're pushing on that price thing, I want you to write this down, guys. It will be like the 3 best things you say. And I say, you know what, Charlie, I completely understand that this is an investment, right? But what are you looking for when you choose an aesthetic practice? Is it price? Is it safety? And is it results? I promise you, I will stop you in your tracks, because if you say price, then I know you're a price shopper. And I would say, you know what? Absolutely. If price is the number one thing that you're looking for, I completely understand. And we're probably not the best fit. Well, no. No, of course I care about safety and results. Okay. I mean, you will trip me up, but the girl on the phone, the guy on the phone, you guys have to get really good at innately listening to what the caller is asking for. So again, what are you looking for when you choose an aesthetic practice? Let them tell you. The callers, the patient's going to tell you. And that's where you know how to take the narrative and navigate the call versus us just talking. What do you think about that?
Love it. That's advanced stuff. That is called, in the biz, we call that negative selling. Okay. Yes, that's an amazing talk track. And if you didn't just write that down, whoever's listening, then I don't know what to say to you, because that was good stuff.
Go back and repeat it back. See, there was my Terri tip right there for you. No, thank you. But I love it. We're like so aligned with that price question. And I think these are just where you said, we got to get to the advanced level, but you can do that Apex platform, guys. All right. So now let's get into the data, because data doesn't lie. Numbers aren't sexy to a whole lot of people, but they do tell the story. So again, I've seen your data. I've seen your dashboards. I mean, I was, my panties were up in a twist when I saw that, in a good way, by the way. So what data should you be measuring to assess the performance of the patient acquisition funnel? Because people get real tripped up about what to look at.
Totally. There's 3 main areas of the funnel. One is how many leads you're getting. Sounds obvious, but that would include how many inbound call leads or web leads, people filling out contact forms online, however they're reaching out to you. You need to try to get them into one place so that you know how many you have. If you don't know how many opportunities you have, it's going to be difficult for you to understand and forecast, like, how well your business is going to do. So that's the first thing. On that note, by the way, is whenever you're measuring leads, whether it's you're working with your marketing agency or you've bought a call tracking platform and recording and tagging calls, be very, very specific about what the definition of a lead is. Because the definition of a lead really is someone who's never been to your practice before who's reaching out. So it's important to make sure that data is accurate. Two, you need to get data or measure data around what we call connection rate. So I mentioned earlier, 14% of all new patient aesthetic leads, the calls don't get answered during business hours. That's a connection rate problem. With web leads, you've got to follow up with those web leads after they come in, calling them, texting them, whatever. So how many of those, what percentage of those people are you actually having a conversation with? That's the connection rate. And the third one is conversion. So once your team or your practice is actually in a communication with a patient, what is that conversion rate? Now, within those three categories of lead count, connection rate, conversion rate, there's many other sub-analytics, if you will, that you want to understand. For example, with conversion, not only my team's conversion rate, what about individual staff members? For lead count, not just my total lead count, what about from different marketing channels? What about from surgical versus non-surgical or whatever categories I care about? But those are the three main buckets. And if you know what's happening in those three main buckets or layers is a better way to think about it in the funnel, you're going to be able to find the low-hanging fruit. You're going to know where the gaps are or the opportunities, glass half full way to look at it, to make some adjustments and have impact and get better by one new patient a day, a week, whatever. That is the way that you approach it.
Oh my God. I just love that. Okay. So I want to be really clear. You said a couple things I want to repeat back. You said lead count, connection rate, and conversion rate. And then you went into the specifics about the verticals and the time, all the things. So can Line do all that?
Hell yeah.
Oh my God. See, this is what I'm saying, guys. This is why Charlie's here with me right now. Because
and remember, no data entry from staff. We do it automatically. So your staff picks the phone up. We take care of everything else.
okay, now see how fancy this is? Look at no data entry, all this crazy analytics that you're going to get. And then you're going to work with Apex platform and you're going to plug all these integrations in and see how your whole business is performing. I mean, this is just like cash money here. I love it. So exciting. I mean, I know I'm still excited about it. I probably wish I had it at my house, if anybody has home phones anymore. Okay. So now another interesting question, compensation. And I don't know if you can really talk about this, maybe just from your perspective or what you see your practices do, but we know compensation is a huge issue for most practices. They either don't know cost of provider labor, they pay wrong, or they might pay illegally. But how do you see people incentivizing, if any, that practices should do for these people answering the phones?
First of all, the front staff, or whatever you want to say, the people at the front lines are the unsung heroes of the business, I think. You kind of alluded to this earlier. So the first question of should you incentivize? Yeah, you should incentivize, because these people are the first impression of, in some cases, a $10,000 or a $20,000 opportunity. Are you kidding me? What other industry is that person not incentivized? They should definitely be incentivized. The most common ways that I see it done when we first meet a practice is they'll have some sort of overall bonus structure. So if the business hits a certain goal, then everybody wins. That's great. That's fine. And actually, I wouldn't tell somebody to stop doing that, because I think it builds some kind of team camaraderie and even incentivizes some other behaviors, in the office as well. But it doesn't get people focused on this call right now. So if you have the data that I just talked about, you can measure people's individual performance and you can start rewarding them for booking appointments. Now, you talked earlier about, well, of course, the end game is to actually have people come in and move forward with procedures. I get that. My advice is don't worry about that. Make it at a level of investment, $1, $3 or something for a booked appointment. That isn't going to be a big deal if that person doesn't move forward, but it's going to change the mindset of your front desk person. That's what you're after. And you don't have to spend $25 or $30, again, $1 to $3 or $5 or something for a booked appointment. If somebody books 10 appointments in a week, like that's not a bad little incentive there. And it's not going to break the bank for you. And if all of those people don't move forward, it's not the end of the world. Now, of course, if all of the people that are being booked aren't quality, then you've got to investigate that. But to incentivize the behavior for someone to even care about the outcomes, you've got to do it on an interactions or a calls or leads basis. So they're focused on booking that person.
I love that. And do you recommend, I have two comments. Well, a question first. Is that like done on a monthly basis, a quarterly basis? What do you recommend?
I recommend monthly.
Okay.
Actually, our platform can help you do this too. It'll send a monthly ledger so you have it all organized, but monthly is definitely the cadence that I've seen that's the most effective.
So I love it. So I'm going to give another statistic. And, if you guys are listening and you follow me, thank you again, always so much. But look, conversions should be around 70%, right? Maybe a little lower for surgical practices just because it's different, maybe around, 50. Would you say that that's fair?
Yes, absolutely. I would say 70% is a top performing practice. We have a couple that are higher than that, but I definitely agree with that.
Right. And so again, if you're not there, guys, and this is what we always say, you have to have a baseline, right? If you have to, Charlie said it earlier, we have to be looking at these inbound calls, the inbound web leads, how many are coming in, what time they're coming in, from what vertical they're coming in, and then getting down to the nitty gritty of the quality of the call, the person doing the call. I think I saw something in your platform. Are there specific questions that you can monitor them on?
Basically, we've taken what the top performing teams are saying on the phone, and then our system can measure if staff are doing that. So it's kind of a general framework or a structure to guide the conversation in the ways that we've talked about today. And then inside of that framework, there's some flexibility, for different questions and sort of scenario-based messaging, like the brilliant messaging you had to handle the pricing question, which I love. But those core elements of the structure are also captured by our speech analytics AI. And so our practices can see if their staff are following that talk track, which of course is super powerful as you're assessing, performance, or even more important, identifying where those opportunities are to help somebody who might be not doing so great in a certain part of the call.
So what do you guys do, Charlie, as an organization? Okay, so your practices have this, you have your AI, you're getting these reports. Do you meet with your practices monthly to discuss the outcome? What if you identify that a practice is just not cutting it and not doing what they need to do? What do you do? Like, how does that work so that, everybody knows?
So the process once we've gone live is we'll have an initial kickoff call or sort of a data review type of conversation with the leadership. That happens 3-ish weeks after we've gone live. So we have enough data to start to see some, maybe not trends, but we get some insights on where are your major opportunities to improve so you can prioritize what you're going to do. And then we have usually monthly calls like that for the first 3 months or so. And typically quarterly is okay after that. So we're always available, of course, when people need us. It's really easy for our customers to get a hold of us. They get a dedicated customer success manager who's going in and looking at what's happening in their dashboard specific to their use case. But we've got a pretty structured cadence to help them understand what the insights are. And I think what most practices find is it's more simple than they expect. They're expecting, I'm not exactly sure what, but you go in and you find, 29% of your surgical leads aren't being answered. And they go find out why. They adjust that. And the next month that goes down to 10%. So 19% more surgical leads. They're improving that connection rate by that much. That's a fairly easy thing to adjust. Now, sometimes people are understaffed. The labor market's tough, yada, yada, yada. I get that. But that's just one example of low hanging fruit that is uncovered that allows our customers to really have an impact quickly. So we find that it's becoming more and more rare that practices are unable to get value out of this. Not because I'm saying how great our platform is. It is great, but it's great because it automatically shows people what they should do. And then once they have that information, they can do something about it.
Amen. I mean, this was so fantastic. And you guys, I hope, I know you all know this, but without patience in the door, there is no business, right? So it's about looking at your whole practice in totality and really, and I say this truly, I think people sometimes look at the aesthetic space and they're like, oh my God, I got to get this call tracking and I have to get this website and I have to buy this, these lasers and this equipment and then a consultant and all the things. And it is an investment though. But if you want to play hard in a very competitive space and a commodity, which can be looked at as a commodity, but you're not the commodity. So all these things are only going to make you empowered, right? With information that are going to allow you to make a decision and to be able to coach your team with actual transparent information, not right something anecdotal that they don't know. So you guys, my tribe, my friends, my family, I know I appreciate you so much for always tuning in, for listening, for, commenting on all my stuff, sending me DMs. I hope that you found this podcast extremely valuable, because if you don't have some sort of call, what do you want to call it? What'd you call it, Charlie?
Call recording and automation software.
If you don't have this on your phones today, I want you to just really sit with yourself. I'm going to ask you a question. How are you measuring the success of your front desk girls or guys? How are you measuring how many leads are coming in? How do you know how much money is being lost? I encourage you. I promise you, it will be one of the best investments that you can ever make, is to implement this in your practice, so that it'll allow your practice manager, right, the opportunity for you guys to listen and the ability to coach. And then I would love the opportunity to work with you guys if you're struggling in this area. But Charlie, where can people find you? And then if they've listened to this podcast, what kind of call to action, what can they do?
Thank you so much, Terri, by the way. This has been awesome. Yes, you can visit our website, as Terri spelled our business name correctly. So LIINE.com. When you go there, at the top of the page, you'll see a button that says request a demo. Click that button. And if you fill out that form, there's a box that says message. All you have to do is type in Terri Ross, and then you're going to get 20% off if you decide to move forward. So, which is a phenomenal promotion that we're really excited to offer, because we love Terri and we want to be a part of this tribe.
Oh my God. So I'm so excited to wrap up season 4 with the win, because it is Charlie Win with Line. So you guys, thank you again so much. I wanted to kick this off with a bang and leave you something super impactful that can actually change your business for next year. And we're excited to launch season 5 with some new and amazing stuff. So stay tuned. Again, if you love this podcast, please share it, leave me a message. And I can't wait to see you in season 5. Ciao.
Thanks for listening to In Touch with Terri. For more information regarding Apex, the aesthetic game changer, visit apexplatform.com. That's apexplatform.com. We'll include links to everything in the episode notes, including links to all of the ways that you can follow Terri Ross Consulting on all social media platforms. Please don't forget to subscribe to the podcast from whichever platform you might be listening from. Thanks again for listening, and we look forward to you joining us on the next episode of In Touch with Terri.